So I know it's been a month since I last actually did a video, but I'm back. I would like to continue with this series. So this is a video about early schizophrenia treatments. Now this is before medication, and now medication was of course the biggest breakthrough that happened, and it was uh, derived back in Germany. But it's very important to know that schizophrenia actually has a very big history. It dates back far before when it was even documented. So schizophrenia early treatments. Now the word schizophrenia is barely even 100 years old. I believe it was coined in 1911, but it has a history dating back even further than ancient Greece and Rome. It's just that first documented with ancient Greece and Rome and also ancient Egypt. And the first doctor who ever tried to treat it was Hippocrates, and he's also considered the first doctor ever, the first modern doctor ever, hence the Hippocratic Oath. Now it's important to note that schizophrenia, while it was noticed by ancient Egypt, they did not know what to do with it, and they did not treat it, and they just believed it was a physical illness that was caused by too much fecal matter in blood when in utero. So the first thing that people thought was schizophrenia was caused by demonic possession. Now, Hippocrates and the philosopher Socrates, they both believed human body had a balance, and if that balance was broken, there would be a problem, such as this. Now, the first treatment, as I said, was an exorcism. This continued even into ancient Rome. So, schizophrenia sufferers were thought to be cursed. It was due to the fact that the harmonious balance in the body was gone. Music therapy was used. So in ancient Greece, music was generally people like fiddlers and just musicians all over who would play the instruments. When it came to ancient Rome, it became more church-based. So Hippocrates sort of thought that poison was in the body rather than in the mind. It had not yet occurred to any doctors or anybody that schizophrenia was a problem with the mind. Special diets, mostly containing teas with Hippocrates' absolute favorite medicine, honey, were used. People would also have vomit-induced purging. They would be forced to drink salt, and they would just vomit out impurities. People were forced to bleed themselves out of the impurities. They were cut and forced to bleed. And as this often led to their death, they later used leeches. So Hippocrates' bloodletting music therapy stayed with the Christian beliefs of the ancient Rome. However, ancient Rome decided to add more things such as confessions and prayers, and sufferers who refused were ultimately killed. This is also the time when the lobotomies were done. I put a picture of a pike here because the lobotomies were not done with medical instruments, but rather with a pike. The person was just pushed into a pike, their head pushed into a pike, and most of the time they died. Now, Hippocrates' treatments continued to be used, as did the Christian traditions, even into the Renaissance times. In the 16th century, this is like the main Renaissance time, sufferers were actually seen as heretics and murdered, often burnt by a stake. In 1563, a book called De Prodigis Daemonum, otherwise known as The Deception of Demons, was published by a writer called Jonathan Weyer, talking about schizophrenia being caused by natural causes rather than demonic disturbances. However, he was called a sorcerer and killed, and thought to be somebody who was going against the church. So anybody who actually held this belief that schizophrenia was caused by something other than the curse from God was killed. So Galileo and the anatomist Vesalius tried to question the authority of the church. They were not killed by the church, the people of the church, but the church did turn a blind eye. However, this did cause a shift from the belief that it was a curse from God to man, rather than the heaven to the people on the earth. But it did not shift the treatments, unfortunately. Burnings, executions, and even lobotomies continued. So psychology is what really actually did cause a shift. So, first of all, there was John Locke, who believed that man was given a clean slate and psychological stressors eventually disturbed him, and he could generally become evil. And then psychoanalytical theory by Sigmund Freud, saying there were problems in childhood that led to these illnesses, was later brought about. Executions ultimately stopped, but lobotomies did continue. However, they were used with medical instruments and not nearly as barbaric. So this is towards the 19th and 20th century. Febrile therapy, like people were given oils and sulfur, which induced fevers, and this was thought it could help with schizophrenia. Now, people who had like malaria, this was around the time when malaria was pretty prevalent. People who had malaria generally turned out to be better after they had suffered from malaria, so that's what the reason for this thought. They also started the insulin therapy. Now, I did show a bit of that in the movie A Beautiful Mind. I don't want to show it again because that movie is copyrighted, of course. But insulin-induced seizures were kept there, and they stayed for a long time. Not used anymore. Sleep therapy, so people would be put to sleep for days at a time. This was mainly to ease the suffering. And if you look at the shift right here, they're trying to cure the problem with the emotional disturbance, not really trying to cure the illness. So they used gases to aid the sufferer. Certain gases would make them act differently. And leucotomies, removing the area of the brain that causes emotion. Now this unfortunately would cause them to be absolute zombies. If you've seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that's actually a leucotomy that he had, not even a lobotomy, but it was his case was caused by excessive shock treatment, which I'll get to right now. So electroshock. Now, electroshock back in the day was not very good. Like, still did the same thing. It killed the brain cells that were and helped the emotions. It killed massive shock waves would be sent to the brain and they killed brain cells, but often they'd kill parts of the brain. Nowadays, electroshock is barely used. It is still used, but hardly ever. But it's a lot safer. And finally, the treatment shifted away in late Nazi Germany, and they believed it was hereditary. Now, just some concluding thoughts. It's important to notice that the illness is actually empirical. You have to observe it. You have to observe it over time before you can actually come to actual conclusion. Some people will say mental illness is not found in other parts of the world. Like, I know some immigrants from Africa who say, oh, there's no mental illness, there's no eating disorders. However, unfortunately, a lot of people sort of hush it up. They worry about discrimination. Maybe their religion tells them they can't have it, but it is prevalent everywhere. Schizophrenia, as I said in the first video, does not discriminate. Every society will have it. Every race will have it. Any ladder of socioeconomic status will have it, and both genders will have it. And schizophrenia, I've written right here that schizophrenia is not always a person's fault. What I mean by this is, it's not always caused by drugs. Like, yes, excessive marijuana usage can cause it. I'm not saying it does, but it's not always a person's fault. Sometimes you're just born to have it. It's no kind of fault of your own. And if you could just leave a comment if you come to this video and like it, and I'd really appreciate that. If you found this video helpful with your studies about schizophrenia, please subscribe. Thank you very much.